It's late, the house is quiet, and you're standing in the light of an open refrigerator. You aren't actually hungry, yet you're searching the shelves for something to eat. Most people define this moment as a lack of discipline. We've been taught to view it as a failure of willpower, a personal weakness that needs to be controlled. This perspective leads to a heavy internal toll. When the willpower fails again, it creates a cycle of self-shame that makes the next night even harder. But this behavior is actually a highly evolved survival mechanism. It's a biological process that is simply misfiring in a modern environment. Certified Master Coach Irina Zota examines how our eating habits are frequently driven by the relationship between stress, emotions, and the brain's reward system. To understand why this happens, the focus has to shift from the digestive system to the neurobiology of the brain. Self-blame is ineffective here. The body is simply executing an automatic neurochemical response rather than a conscious choice. The cycle begins with stress, and in the modern world, a deadline or difficult conversation triggers the same psychological panic as an ancient physical threat. As the brain registers the stress, it floods the nervous system with cortisol. This chart shows how a manageable baseline can turn into a violent chemical spike in seconds. And this spike creates systemic pressure. It feels like a restless physical discomfort that the brain wants to resolve immediately. The brain enters an emergency protocol. It begins a rapid search for a chemical counteragent that can neutralize the cortisol and lower the internal pressure. And there are healthy ways to regulate this state. The brain could choose rest. It could process the underlying emotion or seek out social connection. However, these options are slow. When the system is overloaded, the brain prioritizes speed, looking for the fastest possible relief. In the state of high cortisol, long-term consequences disappear. The only priority is finding an immediate chemical anesthetic to numb the discomfort. And this is where food comes in. It is the most efficient shortcut the brain knows for forcing a chemical reward. This creates the cheap dopamine effect, and as shown here, the act of eating sends a sharp burst of pleasure chemicals directly to the brain's receptors. For a moment, it works. The dopamine release neutralizes the cortisol spike, providing a brief sense of relief. But the trap is set. Because the original stressor was never actually dealt with, the cortisol begins to rise again the moment the dopamine fades away. This sequence hardens into a 4-stage loop. Stress leads to eating, which provides temporary relief, which eventually leads right back to stress. As this loop repeats, it moves into the subconscious. It eventually spins so fast that the logical mind is bypassed entirely. The physical sensation you experience as hunger is often a misinterpreted signal for something else, a need for rest or emotional processing. This is why diets often fail for emotional eaters. Restricting calories does not address the underlying dopamine deficit that keeps this loop spinning. And to break the loop, control must be transferred back from the automatic nervous system to the conscious mind. The first step is a physical pause. You stop for a single second before your hand actually reaches for the food. In the second of hesitation, you ask one question: what am I actually feeling right now? This question often reveals a need for something other than food, perhaps a desire for clarity, a moment to slow down, or emotional support. Irina Zota emphasizes that these deep-seated emotional triggers are difficult to dismantle alone. Identifying these patterns often requires targeted guidance and professional exploration. Replacing an automatic reaction with a conscious decision creates the space necessary to identify the real source of discomfort. Sustainable change in our habits begins with an honest assessment of our internal state. So if you're ready to understand your patterns, visit Noomii.com. You can receive up to 5 free coaching sessions to help you begin building healthier habits.